Hi, this is Jack Stanley in a little bathrobe conversation this morning as the wind is blowing. Perhaps while I speak here, you might hear the windows rattling because we're getting like 50, 60 mile an hour gusts of wind here. It's really quite amazing on this day, March the 2nd, 2018. What I wanted to talk about is something rather interesting, I think. It's space. I don't talk about space much, but I have lived through the entire space age. In fact, I was born before Sputnik. And Sputnik is the beginning of the space age. Now, I just happened to notice on the internet that NASA has created a flyover of Pluto. And so you can see what that planet looks like, or that dwarf planet as we call it now, because it's no longer part of our solar system as one of the planets. It has been knocked down a notch, one might say. But you know something? An interesting thing about space is that we have been dealing in the space race for 60 years. Sputnik went up October the 4th, 1957, and the world has not been the same since. I can remember as a boy watching on television the Mercury astronauts, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, being shot into space, and it was big, big news. And then watching the Gemini, which were two-seaters, and they did the first spacewalks. In fact, there was a period of time, if I recall correctly, that they sent up 2 Gemini missions, and they docked in space. 1966. Somewhere right around there, as I recall. And then we went to Apollo, lots of experiments. And of course, we had a tremendous fire on the launch pad as a rehearsal and killed 3 astronauts. You know, this whole thing with space, we don't realize it today, but it was all part of the Cold War. It was a matter of the USSR and the United States fighting it out as to who was going to get where first. And of course, the Soviet Union, as it used to be called, now it's Russia, but they were the first to get a satellite in space, and that was Sputnik, and that scared the living hell out of people in the United States. And I remember as a kid watching all this, watching the beginnings of the Apollo mission, and being at a friend's house when we landed on the moon. This was in July of 1969, and they had a color television with a lava lamp on top. Okay, this is the 1960s. The interesting thing is this. There were no pictures because no one had ever been there before, and so it was pure cartoon animation. And I remember that, Walter Cronkite. And it was interesting for myself. Years later, I would interview Walter Cronkite. We talked about the space missions. And I said to him, your voice has been translated in every language around the world because we were one people as we stepped onto that moon. And he said, how did they translate the word wow? It was interesting talking to him. And then we went through the Apollo missions and we landed on the moon, and I got to interview Buzz Aldrin, who was in that first mission to the moon. It's fascinating talking to someone who was there. And it was really incredible. He said lots of things, and he said that Neil Armstrong, in landing on the moon, had to cowboy it on the way down. He flew it manually, because the computer was all screwed up and there were a lot of rocks underneath where the computer wanted to land. And in there, pushing and rushing, the switch was broken on the lunar module as to restart the flame to take off, the thrust. And he had to use a felt pen, which he still has and keeps with him because it saved their lives. So in these 60 years, we have seen so much. But let's be honest, we've just scratched the surface. I'd like to be a fly on the wall 200 years from now and look at space and see what we have learned, and perhaps by that time there will be an international conference of peoples. Because, it is kind of arrogant to think that we're the only ones. There is life. There has to be life. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to think in this vast expanse of space that there's nothing else. But we have learned a lot in 60 years, but if I came back in 200 years, I would probably have to say we didn't learn much, because much of what we learned and much of what we thought was wrong. So, I'm sitting here on this windy morning here, thinking about the 60 years of the space age, and having lived through it all. Pretty amazing. It was an incredible period of time, probably of the type that we will never see again. And of course influenced by that great speech by John F. Kennedy. So ladies and gentlemen, something a little different in a bathrobe conversation here in the morning that I don't usually talk about: space. And space will become more and more important as time goes on. But now we can fly over Pluto. And it was only, 56 years ago that we were amazed that we could actually sail around the Earth in one revolution in just a short period of time. How things change. From the time of the Wright brothers in 1903, that here we are in 2018, 115 years since the invention of flight. We have been to the moon, and that's almost 50 years ago. But think of the worlds we will visit in the not-too-distant future. I won't see it, but lots will. New and interested generations will take advantage of this and make spectacular and amazing discoveries.